Hey everyone, Rarity Dash here. Time for another Patreon-sponsored blind reaction. And this one comes to you courtesy of AJ Agreste, who has requested that I react to how Volume 6 managed to be amazing and terrible by EruptionFang. And I don't really want to watch this. I've been putting it off. This is actually the last of the previous batch of Patreon requests that I'll be recording. I don't know if it'll be the last one you see, but it is the last that I recorded. And, yeah, I saw one video from this guy, and that was honestly enough for me. I don't really need another one. This one, from the title, obviously is going to be a bit more positive. We're going to be talking about the good parts of Volume 6 too. But, Volume 6 is my favorite volume, so I don't really need to be told that it's good. and the terrible, we know what he's going to talk about. It's going to be all Adam again. It's going to be Bumblebee. It's going to be... what else is it going to be? Cordovan? You really going to have a big problem with her? She's silly and a weird character and pretty much exists just to force a mech fight. But, is that really going to be something you're going to complain for 40 minutes about? I don't think so. It's going to be the Adam stuff. And, yeah. Volume 6, it doesn't really have a lot that it did wrong, at least in my opinion. We'll see what he has to say. Maybe he'll point something out that I've missed, though I highly doubt it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this started. Here we go.
Volume 6, regarded by many as the greatest season of RWBY in the show's history.
Because it is.
To others, a directionless husk of the show it promised to be, resulting in many to abandon the series altogether. So how could possibly two completely different and extreme reactions be referring to the same volume? Well, let's open our silver eyes, ask a genie, and steal an airship as we take a look at RWBY Volume 6. The story is actually quite simple. After obtaining the Relic of Knowledge from the previous volume, our characters intend on taking it to Atlas. And that's the whole premise of the volume. Shit of course goes south, leading our characters to get split off, where we're introduced to a new character named Maria. She's a very likable character and serves as RWBY's mentor for the volume. Because we all know after having had 6 years to do it, Ozpin's lost his opportunity to be that guy. The show does something here that I really like, where Ozpin begins to be painted as a bad guy. His character for the past 5 years has always been this image of good, and our characters have always looked to him for wisdom and advice. But now everyone begins questioning him, flipping the script upside down. He's not the antagonist, but there's a legitimate reason for them to be on their toes.
Yeah.
And I love that the characters began thinking for themselves, asking questions, seeking the truth, not
doing what Raven said.
Someone who doesn't give them a straight answer. This of course led to learning about Ozpin and Salem's past, which, to put it simple, I thought it was good and think the show needs to do it more than just once a volume. With the truth out there, the season does a really good job at portraying the betrayal the characters felt, particularly Crow. You have this already drunk person who now believes the majority of his life has all been a waste of time. You can feel his betrayal, his heartbreak, and it brings Crow down to the lowest point we've seen him. And that's very interesting.
Well, let's wait for Volume 8.
The type of guy who's been portrayed as the cool drunk. The audience always loved how
I do love all the Crow stuff in
Volume 6.
But
this side of him is something that many have always been wanting to see. The broken man who uses alcohol to fill some void that he has in his life. And this season does a really damn good job at showing Crow's depression and alcoholism. The story at Brunswick Farms was fantastic. After feeling like everything they went through has been for nothing, our characters get faced with the best grim in RWBY's history. The apathy.
Yeah.
These things are freaking awesome. They're not strong, they're not fast, but they will drain your will to live. And having these grim in tandem with the low point of Team RWBY's life was perfect timing, especially considering they were conceptualized a long time ago. This managed to do something that's always important for the story. Do something unique. The setting is unique, the grim is unique, and the way our characters are feeling is unique. Seeing the exact same optimism and personalities from the characters over and over again is boring and it doesn't feel like anything is happening. But Brunswick Farms managed to introduce its own different way of doing things. It's got this mystery element to it which allows the audience to play along to try and figure out what's happening before anything bad actually does. It takes the story
There were a lot of crazy
slow,
theories
not
too.
in a bad way. Volume 4 felt slow, but ultimately it was boring. Volume 5 took things slow, and it came to a complete standstill, and it was bad. But here, despite our characters not going anywhere or doing anything, it manages to still feel like they're moving along. We get to see Crow slip into depression, using an overabundance of alcohol to cope with his life. It's a genuinely sad thing to see, especially considering he's the only adult there the kids really know. Typically, adults are built up and seen as these reliable pillars that children can lean on, because they'll let you know that everything will be okay. They, in their own way, instill hope into our characters and inspire them to become something later in their life. And you can see the disappointment in Ruby because she knows her uncle is better than this. And the apathy isn't helping anything either. The only thing I can say that I didn't like here is that there's a moment where pretty much all the characters feel like giving up. They don't want to continue on with their mission because of the truth about it. Obviously, the apathy is allowing these emotions to come out of their mouth, but these topics are never touched upon again. The rest of the volume, none of the characters are having second guesses about what they're doing, if they can succeed, or if it's one big suicide mission. It'd have been interesting to see some of the girls not be on board for their journey, but instead the moment they leave Brunswick Farms, all those emotions are never addressed again. Not even asking if what they said was true. Did they mean what they said? Do they really believe the mission is a lost cause? Or was it the apathy's effects that influenced them? This season never brings it up again, leaving it as untouched potential for the characters to have had.
I don't know if I quite agree. I think the
Argus was also
actual
really
encounter
nice.
with apathy
the pace
kind
picked
of
up a lot more from the first act.
showed
Not
them
as
stuff.
dreadful and dreary, but a lot more uplifting and high-spirited. We got to see a small bit of the town and get introduced to one of Jean's sisters. After trying to get to Atlas and being blocked by another new character named Cordovan, Team Juniper is informed about Ozpin's past. Once again, I think this was a great decision. Choosing not to hide the information they know from the people they trust really shows to help the bond that each of these characters have with each other. This, of course, enrages Jean, and he almost takes the whole thing out on Oscar, and the next thing everyone knows, he's gone. This opportunity provided some growth for Oscar's character, to allow the story to lend itself to him. Is Oscar really Oscar? Is he being taken over by Ozpin without his knowing? How's he handling it? Him running away offered his character to feel conflicted. But nope, he was just out getting some clothes. Forget all that. He ran away because he's struggling with his identity, or he ran because Jean instilled doubts into his head.
I mean,
it was all just one big misdirection to give him some new clothes. Gotcha. This was also yet another missed opportunity.
I think he's still
to give
feeling that
Oscar some
stuff,
development.
just we
But
don't
instead he's acting a lot like
see it
Ruby,
directly.
where he's just blindly optimistic even though he has no reason to be. Fortunately, after pretty much 3 years of nothing, Ruby Silver Eyes become a topic of conversation, once again course-correcting its past mistakes. It's good that the show is finally shining some light onto these powers. We also got to meet this red-haired woman. We don't get to know anything about her, what the hell she's even doing. She kinda just enters the narrative to throw some feels at the audience.
It's pretty obvious who it
And it's a
is.
sweet little scene.
You don't.
So our characters need to figure out how to get to Atlas. And here's where I'd say the second act ends and the third act begins. And the third act is god awful. So none of our characters are capable of coming up with any ideas on how to get to Atlas and inform Ironwood, and quite possibly the most absurd, ridiculous, mind-boggling plan is hatched, and everyone agrees. They plan on stealing an airship. Come on, is that the best thing you could honestly come up with? I could think of like 3 other solutions off the top of my head. How about
Can
Weiss
you?
just summons a Lancer and fly there herself?
She'll
or hey,
run out of
speaking
aura.
of flying, it's not like
It's
you've got
like-
some pro huntsman with
You're going to a
on
different
large
continent.
portion of his life
It's-
traveling from location to location and can literally turn into
Okay,
a
Crow
bird.
could probably make
No,
it.
it's not like you
I
got
don't know if his
any
power
of that
works,
with you.
but
Or hey, how about you actually just allow Weiss to be taken to
don't know
Atlas
if-
by Cordovan? That's honestly not that bad of a plan. She's being taken to her father, not some serial killer who wants her for ransom.
Yeah,
it's just
but
her douchey dad.
Ruby promised,
yeah,
though.
she feels emotionally beaten by him all the time, but it's not like he's going to actually fucking murder her. And even if he tried, it's not like Weiss can't defend herself.
Ruby promised
took on
she wouldn't
a
be alone.
giant ass suit of armor. She can take some hits. He's an authoritarian, not some supervillain who renders everyone useless if they get in his vicinity. Any of these plans
And that's
are better
important.
than what Jean proposed, but this show refuses to explore any other solutions. Why can't Crow just fly there? Why can't Weiss just talk to Ironwood herself? I'll tell you why. Because the writers were too scared to split up the characters once again after having just gotten them back together, and how much of a jumbled mess it was in the past. But the
Crow thing would have
come up
made
with
sense,
a better
but
reason for Weiss
I
to
don't know.
not go to Atlas herself, aside from, I'm too scared. Hell, remember that letter Crow sent at the very beginning of the volume? They could have just had that reach Ironwood and have him come to Argus himself.
That's true. I kind of at the time thought that might
More
happen.
sense than Jean's plan. But this is a case where the plot doesn't allow the characters to think. They don't tell you why these other things won't work. All it does tell you is that this one specific thing might work, and the show just runs with it. And it leads to quite literally the most useless encounter in RWBY history. So the plan obviously doesn't work.
I mean, this
so
plan would have
Crow
worked
throws out her
if
giant ass
Adam didn't get
men
involved.
to deal with these
Would have worked
kids.
seamlessly.
And we spend not one, not two, but a whole 3 episodes fighting Cordovan. I mean, just how did this happen? How did anyone possibly think this was a good idea? You have 2 people fighting for the exact same side, going at each other's throats, because every single character is too stubborn to see that they're in the wrong. So we spend way too much time watching what feels like a promotion for their other show. But it wouldn't be dramatic enough if we didn't introduce another Kaiju Grim. Is that Godzilla, the motherfucking king of the monsters? Oh,
Pretty much.
You don't fuck with Godzilla, because there's absolutely nothing that can stop him. Oh, what? You can't bring Godzilla into the picture if you're not gonna treat him like he's Godzilla.
Run! It's Godzilla! It looks like Godzilla, but due to international copyright laws, it's not. Still, we should run like it is Godzilla! Though it isn't.
You take the look, you take the powers, but you take the iteration that goes down like a bitch. What makes Godzilla an absolute badass is the fact that nothing can stop him. He doesn't care where he's stepping, when he's stepping.
It's not Godzilla,
He
though. It's
shows
just a-
up to
it's
literally
just a Grim.
kick the shit out of anything that thinks it's better than him. And most importantly, he's the motherfucking king of the monsters. But this thing, it just falls back to nothing more than a generic Grim. What made the apathy so badass was how unique it was, the threat it provides, and the whole scenario that surrounded the characters added to its ability to stand out amongst the other Grim. It was more than just the look and the size that was scary. It's equally about everything else that's going on, and this panic attack the city is having isn't an interesting motivation. But this Godzilla is just as generic as all of the other ones. Why is it scary? Because it's big? That's why it's scary. It doesn't kill anything or give the audience a reason to fear them, as they've been asking for so many years. It breathes fire at a fence and the top of a single building. They should have had this thing inside the town, stomping around, destroying shit, causing utter mayhem, and taking lives. In the same way Godzilla would. That way our characters would actually have a reason to feel guilty about destroying Cordovan's mech. People are dying because they valued their own interests above others. There'd have been something to be learned from the hero's perspective.
And people were in peril,
because
though.
someone is against
And without RWBY,
doesn't mean
people
that
would have
they're your
died,
enemy.
for sure.
Maybe fighting isn't the go-to
The point is to
option,
show
but instead,
the importance of her
Cordovan
silver
is the one
eyes.
who learned a lesson, and Team RWBY walks away as though what they did was right, and don't learn anything from the scenario. And the Grim, well, they still suck and aren't scary. You want to know why this Grim didn't kill anything? Because it isn't time for the story to be sad. We have to wait until the villains take down Atlas. Then and only then are the heroes allowed to feel like they've lost. So until that moment happens, nothing but smiles and inspiration. And while I was complimenting the Silver Eyes earlier, if you ask me, it's too soon for RWBY to have seemingly already gained a pretty decent grasp of them. The Grim were already
She
pretty
failed to
useless
use them,
without
though,
a
the
move
first
that
time.
literally wipes them out.
She had to
with a
rely on the
blink of an
lamp.
eye. But now, they're even less intimidating. I thought at Brunswick Farms her activating her eyes was pretty fitting. All of her friends were about to die and it really brought her back to the time it first happened. However, against the Leviathan, she just thinks of the entire show and it works. Come on, where's the struggle? Where's the training? Where's the moment where you try to do this?
Skipping over part of it.
And it doesn't work. oh wait, they did do that, but then they do it again and it activates. It's not a car you gotta turn the key a few times to get it going. It's amazing how she went from not knowing how to use them in the slightest to now, after a few memories, she can just wipe everything out. It's too overpowered.
It's not reliable yet. Volume 7
to develop Ruby because she's
shows she still hasn't mastered it.
Character. But chill out with her one-shot ability. If you ask me, they made her too strong too soon. And the Grimm are now even less intimidating. I don't know how the third act managed to be so terrible. After an almost perfect first act and a pretty damn good second one, the final act feels like it lacks everything the first two had. It makes no sense. The characters are complete garbage, and there's no substance to anything that's happening. The end of the story is supposed to leave you with something, a feeling, ideas to ponder about while the show isn't airing, and this volume doesn't do that. Those feelings of doubt
kinda does.
the mission at Brunswick Farms aren't addressed again. Oscar doesn't feel like everyone would be better off without him. Blake and Yang don't question whether or not killing Adam was the right thing to do.
I mean,
Instead,
obviously.
it's just some support group sucking each other off saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to go through that," but yet it hardly seems to have affected them. As an audience member, I'm not left with anything to ponder. It doesn't feel like the characters grew from anything or have some heavy burden that must be bared. I feel you could just watch the first 8 episodes and the very end of the finale and feel like nothing was missed. After about 5 years of Ruby being a
that was only one
useless main character, this season sought to fix that negative view that many had of her. The first act does a pretty damn good job with it. She takes control of the situation.
I know he hasn't even talked about Adam yet.
When trust Ozpin, she questions him and seeks out answers. And in Argus, the same deal. When she felt like Jean was crossing the line antagonizing Oscar, she steps in to make sure he doesn't do anything he'll regret. The show really felt like it began to understand how Ruby's development should be handled. But if you're catching on, the third act is horrible. How many motivational speeches did Ruby have these last few episodes? 3? 4? That's way too many for the span of about 4 to 5 episodes. Even Sarge would tell her to calm down on the speeches. In the first 2 acts, how many speeches did she have? 1? Maybe 2? And let that speak for itself. If there were motivational speeches Ruby was giving in the first 2 acts, I don't remember them. It means it mixed well with her natural dialogue and it didn't feel intrusive. So the fact that I can very distinctly remember every single time she stepped into the spotlight to give some over-the-top dramatic, inspirational speech about growing is terrible. It's more than just saying that you've grown. Look at me do whatever I want. But it's about responsibility, valuing your team, valuing your friends, something that was done perfectly in the prior acts, trusting Juniper with Ozpin's secret, seeking Ozpin's secret, not accepting blind trust but acting as though it must be earned, trying to stay optimistic in a situation that requires you to be optimistic for the morale of the team. And the third act doesn't know that at all. It just keeps constantly throwing speech after speech at you as if it's supposed to mean anything. As if speaking words when you're in a completely retarded situation helps your character in any way. There's a complete lack of understanding with what they did. Jean. I don't have much to say about him other than the fact that this show's kinda screwing him over. He's already pretty useless. He can't fight and, well, that's a lot of what happens in Ruby. So they built him up as the strategist. What he lacks in brawn, he makes up for in brain. Too bad, his brain sucks. I already talked about how the show refused to acknowledge any other possible solution on how to get to Atlas. But part of being the strategist is that you're the person who should lead. You come up with the plan, you need to make sure everything goes according to plan. But the third act, forgetting everything, puts Ruby in charge to remind everyone that she's the main character and has development. But you're not supposed to set up the chessboard, tell everyone the game plan, and hand the reins over to someone else. There's an endless amount of possibilities that can come into play, and you'd want the strategist to be in charge to potentially change the strategy. Instead of treating him as a Shikamaru or an L where there's an understanding that stakes are had, that sometimes
I don't think he's quite at that level though. He's a good strategist, but I don't think he's that.
People can die. People will die. But it's his job.
I don't think he was ever that.
Pieces are safe. It's instead, yep, that's the plan, let's see how it goes. Putting it on par with such other brilliant strategies as hit it harder. And even Oscar comes into play, telling everyone how they can take down the whole mech. Oscar, that's not your role. That's Jean's. It's why people turn to him for the strategy. But the third act wants to make sure that everyone
I think it's kind of Oscar's role too. I mean,
everyone has a role that helps
got Ozpin.
contribute. Not every
He's supposed to be
character
that.
needs to contribute in some sort of unique way, especially when it belongs to another character. You sidelined Ren and Nora, why can't you sideline Oscar? Ruby shouldn't be leading this heist, because it's not her plan. Oscar shouldn't be analyzing how to take down the mech, when Jean does the exact same thing. I already feel bad for the guy because of how often he can't contribute, so don't take away the small things that he can do and is supposed to be there for. Yang's PTSD. What PTSD, some of you might ask, and that's about right. The show has been building up Yang's PTSD since Volume 4. She's had nightmares. She's had visions. Adam seemingly
I think people who
haunted
complain
her
about
when
it
she
don't
was
really
awake
understand
or
PTSD.
asleep. Yet the moment it should come into play and really affect her, nothing happens. Actually, nothing happens. God damn
kind
it,
of irritable
you
the
set
entire
up a
volume.
very complicated
And
mental disorder for one of your characters to have. You have the opportunity to have her really be traumatized and bring her back to her lowest of lows. But instead, she gets over it as though it was never a factor in the first place. Because you need to remind everyone that she's a strong female protagonist. To put it plain and simple, her trauma was being built up. It felt like she was barely managing to keep it at bay. That the moment Adam flashed his face, she wouldn't be able to overpower her emotions and fear. Let's compare it to another show that I just recently watched. The Punisher. In Season 2, the character Billy Russo is having nightmares of what the Punisher did to him. He doesn't remember anything, but he's having nightmares and is haunted by them. He's too scared to go to sleep because of the fear it instills into this man, who's established to be a very strong individual. And just when you think he's gotten over everything and he's a new man, Frank shows up and Billy freezes. He can't move. Bullets are
Adam's not the
he's
Punisher,
being
though.
shot. He's stuck there not moving because he's now faced with the thing that has haunted his dreams. I want to tell you right now, I didn't even really like this season of The Punisher, but at least it handled its characters in a way that made sense. It was building something up, and it gave it the payoff. Yang's development feels completely rushed. It doesn't feel earned, and people are obviously upset that this aspect of Yang didn't really do anything. She never lost because of it. She was still getting into all kinds of fights, and most importantly, she never lost a fight since, and still has yet to lose. After 2 volumes of setting it up, much like most things the series ends up doing, it doesn't have a good payoff. I very briefly want to talk about the animation, primarily regarding the fights. Now, I'd never want to take anything away or discredit the animators who work on the series. They do an incredible job, and I have nothing but praise for the hard work and dedication they put in. The characters' facial expressions are unbelievably emotive. It's the most detailed it's ever been, and even more subtle things like the way Blake's ears move are a nice touch to the emotion she's feeling in the moment. With that said, ever since Monty's passing, the fight choreography in the show has always left a lot to be desired. Movement would feel
I thought it was pretty good in
slow,
Volume 6.
Impact wouldn't have the same oomph as it did in the past, and it just wasn't as badass as it once was. But as time went on, it began to feel like they had found their rhythm and began to animate fights in a way that they knew how and felt comfortable. And so came Yang and Blake versus Adam. Shit went all out.
Yeah,
Adam
that was
doing some
my favorite fight
combo attacks. He had new abilities.
so far in the
Things
entire
once
series.
again felt like they were as badass as they used to be. And you'd imagine my surprise when I learned that the whole reason things felt like their old self
Well,
was
Monty
because
did part
this
of it.
used a lot of Monty's old animation. Once again, I'm not trying to discredit anything the current animators do, but Monty, no doubt about it, was special. I didn't realize why I always thought things felt different, but seeing Adam's fight hit me with a realization I didn't know that I had. You see, Monty wasn't the best writer, he wasn't the best storyteller. What he was an animator, and that's what he did best. But he had a foot in both pools, and he utilized that to his advantage. What I saw in this fight and the way he was fighting was a character who's been intertwined with Blake's life. He and her are 2 sides of the same coin. He also has this shadow ability. It wasn't exactly like Blake's, but it was similar enough to associate with her. And that's what I feel is really missing and how Monty managed to stand out. His best story was told through the animation side of things, what he was good at. Blake's semblance has a way to show the audience that she always runs, Yang's hot-headed tantrums, and Weiss's high-class way of combat. Just by looking at their fights, you knew so much about the characters themselves. It was more than the writer's ability to tell a story through the narrative, and it was a lot more than the animator's ability to express a lot more emotion. But Monty having a foot in both the animation as well as the writing allowed him to really thrive in the world that he created and the characters in it. And I didn't realize that I hadn't had that sense of storytelling for a while. In the past, the audience gathered a lot of information about the characters solely based on their trailers. But in current years, it doesn't do that as much. Talk semblance and fighting style don't really tell me much about her, and same goes for Maria and Hazel and so on. The characters have begun to feel like they fight the same way. No specific style, no unique ability to stand out and tell its own story. The animators can't stray from the path they're given. They're told to animate something, and so they do it. They implement as much as they can, which brings a lot more expressive emotion to the table, but not in the same way.
Hazel was pretty cool. His fighting, very different.
Writers, they tell their story through its narrative, and so a lot of the characters feel flat and generic, especially when it comes to the combat. Monty told the best parts of his story and his characters through his animation. In the same way a musician would use the instruments and the lyrics to create its own message and its own feeling. Monty did that through the fights. Do I believe he was the best writer? No. Miles and Carey may be a lot better at writing a story
Body
than
pillows.
he was, but he had his own way of telling his story, and that's what these old animations reminded me of. But the fights and the people in them have all begun to feel the same. If you look at many of the more recent characters, their semblances begin and end as their Achilles heel. The recent characters are so dependent on their semblance that, without it, they're completely useless. They can't attack, they can't fight, they're utterly futile. And this winds up being the demise of a lot of people like Talk and Adam. Roman didn't have a semblance, yet he stood his ground against Sun and Blake. In the earlier days of the series, not many characters solely relied on their semblances to fight, Yang and Blake being some of the only exceptions. But people like Sun, Neptune, Ruby, Roman, Nora, Ren, the list goes on. There never used to be such an over-reliance on a semblance to win a fight. Often it was just the character's innate ability at fighting which won them an encounter. And this leads to another one of my criticisms regarding the action: the stakes. They are too damn high all of the time. Everything is always this life and death scenario. Someone has to win or else they're gonna die. And the show is always doing unnecessary things like poisoning Crow and impaling Weiss.
Yeah.
Everything is so high stakes during every encounter. Adam has to show up, but instead of it just being an encounter, it's a life and death situation. Just like the last life and death situation in the season before that. And the season before that. There's a very noticeable formula Rooster Teeth is following. It's easy to predict. It's annoying to constantly dangle the lives of our characters out there towards the tail end of the season, but to ultimately know that nothing bad will ever happen to them, and it very often only hurts more characters than it helps. Remember when fights were kinda just fights? It wasn't life or death, but you felt like, maybe we'll arrest him if we win. But the past 3 seasons haven't done anything like that. There's always gotta be a death or someone's about to die. Just talking about the animation, I want you to compare 2 scenes. One is from Volume 1 and the other is from Volume 6. And notice how the characters are firing their weapons at an enemy from a distance.
Yeah.
Did you spot the difference? It can be hard to
It was a lot shorter.
Did you see how much flair was there in the past? Did you notice how it almost felt like there was a lot more effort that
I mean, honestly, it seems to have a bit more impact on the... Well, except that part.
Shadowboxing the entire time. Going all out, even though all she is doing is firing her weapon. But here it's as boring as uncreative as it could possibly have been. There's no flair. There's no eye candy. It's just boring. Was the budget not there to spend the extra time to make that look better? Or did Genlock eat up that budget?
Probably. I mean, that's what... Genlock ate up a lot of the budget. That's why there's no Ruby Chibi anymore.
But the devil is in the details. If something as simple as firing your weapon is reduced to standing there doing absolutely nothing, then how am I supposed to feel like effort is being put into the show? It looks incredibly lazy, it's uncreative, and if effort isn't put in there, then why should I believe effort is put elsewhere, and not being directed to another show? Let's just put it plain and simple.
There we go.
Ruby's villains suck. Sure, they look cool, have interesting costume designs, and even have some pretty badass powers. But that doesn't mean anything when the writers can't handle them correctly. Here's a very simple question I ask for you. Who was the villain of this season? Was it Cinder and Neo? How about Adam? Perhaps Cordovan? Here's
Probably
why, no
Adam.
matter which answer you thought of, it was handled poorly. An antagonist is a character.
I don't think you need a
who's
single
just
villain
problem for
for
our
a season.
viewers to deal with. They have their own motive, they have their own direction, but Ruby doesn't know how to handle their villains because there was no villain of this season. I want you to think of any TV show you recently watched where there is a good guy and a bad guy. Now I'm willing to bet that whatever show you were thinking about, no matter which season it was, the bad guy had a constant presence. The show would be constantly cutting to them, letting the audience know that, hey, this guy's relevant to the season. It's showing you who it is you need to be looking
My
out
hero?
for. It spends the time building up more of their character, what's driving them, and it would all eventually lead to a climactic battle where their two perspectives would clash, putting a resolution to the
I don't
season
think that's
and
always
end
the
of
case.
problem. In Nomad of Nowhere, you have Dawn and Red Manuel. Sure,
Glad to
we
get
followed
some
the
Nomad of Nowhere
we also
reference.
follow these two and learn why it is they
Glad
were
that it's not
captured.
forgotten.
In Red vs. Blue, the meta isn't some off-screen villain who just shows up during the end of the season. We see him stalking his prey. We follow him as he follows our characters. He can't speak, so it's a bit harder to follow him, but many people around him do speak, and when Washington joins him, we follow their perspectives, and Ruby doesn't do that. In the third act of the story, Adam just shows up out of thin air, acting as
He was in the
final
first
boss of
episode.
the season. But where was he literally the rest of the season? Why weren't we following his perspective alongside the heroes? Instead, we just kept cutting back and forth between Cinder and Neo. Why are we following them? They don't even come into contact with our characters the entire season.
Well,
Why
they
are we
do next
focusing
season.
so much on what they're doing instead of following Adam? I get
So
they
it's not
wanna
gonna be
set them up
interesting.
for the next
Just
season,
him menacing
without
and
focusing on the current.
leering at Blake from a
The show lets you
distance.
do this
Like,
thing
what
where
the
they
hell?
build up a character in the
It's not gonna be a
previous
scene.
volume, pay no focus to them on the current one. It's just constantly setting things up that the payoff is often poorly executed. There's this storytelling principle known as Chekhov's gun. It's one of the first things you'll learn when you're telling a story. It says, if you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely
And we had Adam on the
is.
train in the
If
first
it's not gonna
episode.
be fired, then it shouldn't be hanging
Wearing
there.
a completely
But
different
the
outfit.
problem with how it ended up being used,
The hood and
is that
everything.
they chose to do that on the antagonist of the volume. The whole purpose of Chekhov's gun is that it's not a major detail, and some can easily forget
Okay,
about
I guess
it.
I see the
Volume
point, but
5. I just want you to hear the words that are coming out of my mouth. Volume 5 managed to implement this better. Remember when Yang showed that she could detach her arm and then at the end of the volume, she did that? The payoff was absolute dog shit, but at least it sort of understood how to use it. It should be done on something minor, not your main villain of the season. It's important to follow the perspective of the villains because they are their own person. Their sole existence shouldn't be to act as an obstacle for our heroes to overcome. They shouldn't enter the narrative to exist as a problem, but that's exactly how they all end up being treated as. The season never gave me a reason to care for Adam because I didn't even know he was supposed to be in it. It's just some half-assed attempt at the end.
pretty obvious from the character short
Well,
before it
that'd
and
be
everything.
Nice to see, have some backstory on earlier in the season, but they didn't even try. It's one thing if it doesn't go over well. It's a completely different thing if it doesn't even make an attempt to give you anything. His whole story arc is written from the perspective of what? What is he doing? What is happening? It's constantly telling you what he is doing instead of telling you why he is doing it. The question of why is much more compelling than what he is doing. Why is he going after Blake? Why is she so important to him? These are all questions that could have helped strengthen Adam's character, his personality, as well as his motives. But he's written so poorly that the show just tells you what he is doing and what is happening. Now I could go on and on about Adam and how the writers had absolutely no idea what to do with his character. I've already made a video where I discussed how it all went wrong, but there was something I didn't bring up that I wish I had. When it comes to antagonists, a lot of the times, they are the heroes of their own story. Despite what the masses think, many villains often believe that what they are doing is right or for the better. They'll be the one
I don't think
that brings the
Torchwick
world
did.
to a new age of enlightenment. Every now and then you
think he
get that
just-
crazy guy who's just
I mean,
crazy for the sake of
if you
crazy.
can't beat 'em,
But when
join
you
them.
Put yourself into the shoes of a villain.
Doesn't quite fit
you're
with that.
able to see how they believed they are in the right. Not all the time, but when it's so easy to spot, it should be, well, easy. And Adam should have been that. You could see how he believed he was the hero for the Faunus. You could tell that he believed that what he was doing was right. But after they changed him into an angry ex-boyfriend, I ask you, how is he the hero of his story? He's not the hero of his story. He's the antagonist of the hero's story. And that's where the biggest problem lies. He doesn't feel like he's his own character. He only feels like he exists to be a problem. I
don't think that always has to be the case.
To make Yang and Blake grow. Learning of Mercury's past was pretty cool, and at least some characterization is being built up with him. He and Emerald often fight, but it genuinely feels like how two siblings who love each other would fight. It's not really hostile, and there's never this sense of danger as if one of them wishes to kill the other. It felt like it was establishing this dynamic between these two as well as Cinder, and I really hope that's how it maintains. Right now it's very obvious that neither Emerald or Mercury really want to be with Salem now that Cinder's not around. But I fear they're going to try to show, hey, they're not with Salem, so that means they're turning to the side of good. I genuinely hope that doesn't happen. I like what's being set up as a loyalty towards Cinder as opposed to a cause. So these two aren't fighting for good or evil per se, but they're sticking through it for the people that they value most. While I'm sure many people would like to see these two redeemed, I like the prospect of them still fighting for or against the things they wish to do. And should I even mention Cinder and Neo? I mean, why are they even here? They hold no significance to the story, and you literally had a scene at the end of last volume where you killed her. Perhaps you should have held
did you really buy that?
Back to the
did you really think that she was dead?
And Neo? Well, it seems like after being hounded year after year, panel after panel, constantly being berated with questions asking if Neo's going to return, the writers finally caved in and put her into this volume for no other reason other than fan service. Don't get me wrong, I like Neo and I think she can have an interesting backstory regarding Roman, but there's no need for her to exist within the confines of this volume. Her and Cinder had nothing other than
if they weren't in this volume,
Adam,
then
who was supposed to be the villain of the season. One of the reasons
it'd be kind of weird for them to just show up next volume.
Good is because the antagonist was consistent through the whole volume. Seeing Cinder, Mercury, and Emerald was relevant because they were relevant. But here, neither Cinder nor Neo should be in this volume. There's no payoff with these two. I'm not interested in these two because they're not doing anything interesting. What made Volume 3 so good, and one of the reasons it's well received, was because it felt like the stakes were raised. The heroes could die, villains could triumph, and there was no telling what the future held. But after Volumes 4, 5, and 6, you realize nothing's changed. Sure, they try to have things feel dramatic as though the heroes could lose, but they never do. They still win over and over and over and over and over again. The stakes weren't raised because the villains can't win a single goddamn fight. It went back to feeling like any other generic anime where the heroes never lose because they have plot armor. And that feeling hasn't changed. So now the villains are nothing more than a pathetic group that can't triumph at a single task they try. The writers need to understand what Volume 3 did to the series and how it changed things, and why people like it so much. What's even more sad is how this volume's terrible ending could have so easily been the best thing the show delivered, firing on all cylinders. Here's how the events should have transpired. First, more focus should have been given to Adam's story earlier in the volume so we could expect him and hype ourselves up for it. So he and Blake should have met one-on-one, exactly how it played out. But instead of Yang showing up and having this empowering moment to show that she's a strong female protagonist, she should have seen Adam atop that cliff and panicked. Her PTSD should have come into play stronger than it ever had, and she should have been petrified. Then instead of spending the other 3 episodes watching Ruby and Cordovan fight, wasting our time there, Yang should have called her team, telling them that they need to help Blake. Keep in mind that Adam is a character that Ruby and Weiss still have no idea what he looks like. He's only this person that Blake talks about all the time. So they either take the plane or use Weiss.
I don't think she really talks about him all the time. I mean, that was the first time she ever mentioned him. That scene that you just showed. And Ruby wasn't even there for that.
And Weiss can see the Schnee Dust Company brand on Adam, setting up for the Atlas arc. And Ruby can come to see the man who amputated her sister and broke her spirit. The show could have been able to re-cement that Adam was the real deal. Having like a 9v1 against Adam could have spoken for itself. Hell, why not even throw Cordovan into the mix? Now, it's a 9v1v1. Everyone's against each other and resources would need to be split between taking down Adam and stopping Cordovan. And it would have given a better excuse to destroy part of her mech. Just have Adam do it. have Cordovan blast him like what happened in the Black trailer, just to have him throw it right back at her. It makes a lot more sense than having Team Ruby destroy it, and at the end of it all, Adam can lose. Cordovan can arrest him right then and there, thus writing him out of the story. And Weiss would have her direction, knowing about the company branding. How much better of an ending would that have been? The show wants so hard to tell the entire story from the perspective of the protagonists. But the protagonists are young girls who've hardly experienced anything in life. Meanwhile, all these adults who've been through some tragic shit in their lives, the show doesn't want to tell if it's not going to be told to every character. Just show how Adam got his brand. We don't need to witness it from the perspective of Blake
it's
and
not
Weiss.
really important.
The world doesn't revolve around these 4 girls, but it's written as though it does. No other character is important because all they're meant to do is further one of these 4. They value these 4 so much that it literally ends up affecting every other character in the series. Well, if you don't like the show, stop watching it.
Yeah.
Did you ever stop and think, maybe I do like Ruby, but just thought the 3rd act was shit, so I'm gonna complain about it, make videos where I talk about why it sucks, and then watch the next season in hopes it gets better. How about that? No one here is trying to tell you how you felt about the volume. This is my interpretation, and you're free to agree or disagree. This is a biased review. My biased. Just like anyone who reviews it, it'll be their bias. There's no such thing as a factual review. You just want to believe it's facts because you agree with what's being said, but that doesn't make it a fact, so learn to...
This is why I don't really watch reviews.
In conclusion, Volume
Unless I'm
6
paid $20.
is genuinely a very good volume that managed to explore a side of our characters we've never seen. Direction is given to try and help course correct mistakes that were made in the past. But Volume 6 is also a complete disaster that mishandled certain characters, lost sight of what made certain people who they are, or just completely abandoned parts of them altogether. The 3rd act was so bad that it genuinely made people give up on the show moving forward. The 3rd act is the most important to nail down. You can recover from a bad 1st act. Hell, you can even recover from a not so good 2nd one. But the 3rd act is what the audience is left with. It's the feeling you want to leave them for the future. But Volume 6's final act was just that bad. It doesn't raise any obstacles for our heroes to ponder about, or give a lesson that should be learned. It's treated as a fairy tale where everything ended happily ever after, and the fan service feels way too high in way too many moments. Volume 6 really is pretty damn amazing while also being pretty fucking terrible.
Alright, we're done with that. So, what do I say about this review? I think what I noticed is that he seems rather incapable of kind of reading between the lines, of actually interpreting what he's given. He seems to expect everything be stated outright, that we need to actually, like, it actually has to be said. Like, I mean, the whole Oscar thing, with Oscar getting his new clothes. I mean, I made that joke when it happened, too, because it was kind of amusing, that thought. But, no, I mean, Oscar is having his thoughts. He's definitely troubled. There's more happening while he's off screen. And the fact that at the end of it, he's decided to trade in his old farmhand gear, his old outfit that he's been in since the start, for something more battle appropriate, is, I think, testament to showing his ultimate decision and his choice. It's there's more there than just him buying a new outfit. And yeah, the whole idea that we need to know how exactly Adam got that scar is, I think, kind of silly too. I mean, it's pretty obvious he was branded. It doesn't really matter the reason. It's about the effect. It's about what that means for the society. It's Yeah, even the whole thing about them just dropping their misgivings after the Brunswick farm arc, I think. I mean, you have to think about how that event would actually affect them psychologically. Like, to be faced with that hopelessness in such a literal manifest form as the apathy, and have to overcome it to kind of see where that leads and come away from it. That's going to have a profound impact on their mentality going forward. And I don't know. And it's similar with Yang too, I think. I mean, the point isn't with PTSD, with her PTSD, it isn't about her freezing up. It's about how it's completely changed her personality since it happened. Just think about her character. I mean, even now that she's back on her feet and fighting and seems okay, she's still just not the same person she was in Volume 3. Her nerves, her just everything, she's changed as a person by what happened to her. And that's, I think, a bit more realistic than just Adam shows up and she freezes. It's like, I don't know, kind of frustrating to watch just because. And yeah, I guess I mean, I don't know, the plan. The only thing that he mentioned that could have worked is Crow going ahead. And I don't even know, because I don't know how the power works, the whole bird power, if it does rely on aura or anything. I would imagine it doesn't, since it's magic. And he can go far distances with it. But would he be able to bring the relic? Probably. I mean, he was able to transport, he had Osmond's cane. He took that with him. And I mean, his clothes and everything else, his weapon and stuff, so he probably would have been able to take the relic. But that would have meant stranding the girls, and it would have meant a volume of waiting around. So just from a narrative perspective, even if that could have made sense, it wouldn't have really been satisfying. I mean, they could have at least brought it up, and I'm sure they probably did. That's another thing. I mean, there's a gap between... We don't actually see them come up with a plan. So maybe they threw out other suggestions, other things they could do. We don't see the whole planning phase. And yes, that plan, it would have worked. It would have worked perfectly. That's the other thing. I mean, I said that, but without Adam's interference, and they had no idea Adam was around anywhere, that plan would have succeeded masterfully, because the radar would have been off, and it just would have there would have been no trouble whatsoever. But Adam appeared and threw it off course. So it wasn't a bad plan. It really wasn't. It would have worked if circumstances just were slightly different. So I'm sure Jean did come up with that plan. I mean, it was his idea in the first place, so I'm sure he was largely responsible for planning that strategy, which would have worked without Adam. But yeah, I don't think he really thinks about the characters in between what we see, and how there are these... that other line, he said about Blake talking about Adam all the time, which is just not true. I think that's just not true. She talked about him once for the first time in that campfire scene. That was the first time she ever mentioned him to her friends. And then I think the second time she ever mentioned him was in the scene in Volume 3, after they're disqualified. And that was, I think, that probably was the second time she ever mentioned him. And I mean, those are two important Blake scenes, and two that really stand out. And if you consider those to be the only times Blake... if you consider just the scenes we see to be the only times Blake ever speaks to her friends ever, then I guess, Blake talks about him all the time, but that's not the case. There are things in between. that we're not seeing. It's kind of how it works. So, yeah. I think there's a certain lack of response for, like, nuance and just the stuff left between. What else? And I mean, Adam, you don't really need to see him. I mean, obviously, what Ruby was trying to do, what the crew was trying to do, was set it up as kind of a surprise. They wanted to have him appear out of nowhere. That was kind of the whole intended effect. But at the same time, still sort of build it up a little bit, because they have him on the train, and then they have him. They have the scene at the farm. I mean, that's not actually him. That's actually Yang hallucinating. But still, the talk that her and Blake have after that kind of sets up the fact that maybe he is out there. Maybe he is following them. So that when we do see it, I mean, it's acceptable. It's something we can accept. And I mean, what would a Volume 6 Adam scene look like? Like, I mean, he's just following her. He's watching her, waiting for her friends to leave. It's not going to be interesting, and it kind of will lessen the impact of him actually showing up. I don't know, but I feel like we're kind of just missing a lot of context here. What else? I don't think the mech fight. I mean, yes, Cordovan exists to force that mech fight. Her character is silly, and I can see how she would break immersion for certain people, because she is just such a weird and out there character who doesn't quite fit with the vibe of the show, especially at this point. But I don't know. I didn't really. Personally, I think the mech fight was fine. I think it didn't really feel too long. I mean, it was balanced out by the Adam fight. I mean, all those episodes, he said, it took 3 episodes, but all those episodes were split with Adam stuff. So it was not really as long as all that. Because we had, just 2 different fights split out over those episodes. It was. I mean, he made some decent points about the animation. I mean, Monty's animation is clearly just above everyone else. Even at this point, I do think that we've gotten a lot better, especially with Volume 6 and Volume 7. But, we're not going to quite match that mark that Monty had. And that's sad, but that's just the reality. I mean, what can you really do? I mean, you can try to get better. You can try and actually improve and get to that level, but sometimes you just can't really. I mean, some people are just more talented and more accomplished, and you're not going to get there even with effort. I know Monty. He was putting in effort too. It's not like he just magically made this stuff appear, but he had a just mastery of it that allowed for those fight scenes to be as good as they were. And I don't know, it kind of feels a little bit unfair to complain about it just because there's really nothing we can do. I mean, there isn't another Monty. And yeah. But despite the title, it really does seem like he spent a lot more time on the negative. The other thing, the Cinder and Neo, like, everything has to have a payoff this volume. I mean, when in shows is that ever the case, really? I mean, I guess if there's only going to be one season, then everything really pays off. But any show that goes on for multiple seasons, where it's like an ongoing big story, a greater story arc, you're not going to necessarily see every little detail get paid off, every little plot. I mean, the plots are not always going to intersect. There's going to be stuff that just sort of stays in its own lane until the time comes. And I think that's fine. I mean, it just makes it better once it does connect. And it did in Volume 7. I mean, when Neo shows up, when Cinder shows up, it's just a greater effect because we've seen them. I mean, that's kind of what he was pointing with why he wanted the Atom stuff. We have that now with Cinder and Neo when we get to Volume 7. So when they do show up, we know what's been going on there. Yeah. But, I don't know. Trying to think, I mean, gotta make sure I address everything that I was thinking while watching this. But, I think I covered most of it. I mean, I guess I should be thankful that he didn't really hit the Bumblebee so hard. Just that line about fan service at the very end, which we all know what he means there. I mean, don't really see how it's fan service, but whatever. I mean, I also really see how Neo. I'm pretty sure. I mean, maybe the fan outcry did lead to her coming back. I mean, probably it did to some extent, but with how she was blown off in Volume 3, I'm pretty sure they had an intention to bring her back eventually anyway. I mean, that's not really an end, so and they just had to wait until they had her. They kind of knew what to do with her. Yeah. Kind of struggling to think of anything else to say, so I guess I'm gonna let this be the end. Not sure I really enjoyed this very much, but it gave me some stuff to talk about, so I don't know. Anyway, hope you liked the reaction. Let me know if you did, and see you in the next one.